Louise, thanks so much for doing this. Who are you? Where do you work, and what are you interested in?
Um, my name is Louise Antony. I teach at the University of Massachusetts and starting in the spring, part-time at Rutgers University. And you and I have been pals for quite some time, I think.
Yes, we have. So you're the author of No Good Reason, Exploring the Problem of Evil in the Norton Anthology. And you also edited this fascinating collection, Philosophers Without Gods, Meditations on Atheism and the Secular Life, in which you have an essay. And I just interviewed Roger White, who wrote an essay on the fine-tuning argument. Roger was batting on team theism, and you're batting on team atheism. Okay, so let me start with a question that the editors of the Norton Anthology posed to the reader. Consider the following response to Antony. If God eliminated suffering altogether, human beings would not need one another. Children would not depend on their parents for their basic needs, since God would provide if the parents didn't. People would not depend on friends and family for care and compassion, since we only need care and compassion because we suffer. God leaves us vulnerable to suffering because we are some of the most valuable, because some of the most valuable human relationships are only possible if we are vulnerable. God lets us suffer because if he didn't, love and friendship, which involves care and compassion, would be impossible. How might Antony respond? Well, since I have you, how would Antony respond?
Well, what I would say, what I do say, I have a few things to say in response to this suggestion. The first thing is that if we're looking at the problem of suffering all over, this particular consideration doesn't address the massive amounts of non-human suffering. I go through this in some gory detail in the article, but they're, non-human, all sentient beings on the planet suffer, and a lot of them suffer an awful lot. Probably a lot of them live lives that are plagued by suffering almost every minute of their existence. And there are kinds of human suffering that this doesn't address either, which are things like chronic pain that never is relieved, despite people's best efforts to do so and to comfort the victim. There's just an awful lot of suffering that isn't connected with the goods of friendship and concern and compassion. So this would only address a limited range of the suffering that exists in the world. But the other thing is, in order for the suffering that makes us need our fellow human creatures and that makes for the possibility of certain kinds of relationships with others, I think that necessity could be challenged, that there are no valuable human relationships that would exist if suffering were eliminated. But I'm going to leave that alone. It still would have to be the case for the possibility of these friendships to justify the suffering that they necessitate. It would have to be that the good of these friendships, of these relationships, of these familial relationships and so on, has an extraordinarily high moral value because there's an extraordinarily large amount of suffering. Now, if they have this extraordinarily large amount of moral value, how is it that, at least on the conceptions of monotheism, the spellings out of monotheism that I'm familiar with, is part of the story that after we die, after we shed this mortal existence, we're going to exist in a state of perfect bliss. That is, if we haven't committed a mortal sin or something that's going to condemn us to hell. But in Catholicism, there was the presumption that you would spend some time in purgatory. But after all is said and done, you're going to be in this blissful state without suffering for all eternity. So this
Right.
value is supposed to be so great that it justifies this intense suffering, but it's only present for a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a second, an infinitesimal fraction of the time that we're in existence. So that seems kind of puzzling to me. And the final thing I want to say is that however valuable these friendships and relationships are, it might be that their value doesn't justify the suffering. I mean, there are some projects that one can imagine. I don't have a good example prepared. We'll take Paul Gauguin abandoning his family to go off to Tahiti to paint. You know, it might be that no matter how valuable his paintings are aesthetically and culturally, that he didn't have the right to sacrifice his family's well-being for the sake of this. And I'm inclined to say, maybe this is a great moral good, but it's not obvious to me that God was justified in pursuing the project of making these goods available to creatures like us, given the cost.
Okay, very good. You certainly came out with all guns blazing on that question, giving no quarter whatsoever. Okay, so how about this? Okay, a lot of things to think about. Thanks for that.